It's my pleasure to welcome all of you. I'm Patrick Mann. I'm the director of the School for Advanced Studies in the Arts and Humanities here at Western. And this is the second in our Winter 2021 speaker series. I'm thrilled to be able to welcome Xiong, who's here from UBC, and Gui, who is here from Los Angeles. They will be presenting their work today and also, of course, having a conversation. Gu is an important artist originally from China who has a long and illustrious career and story to tell. And Gui is an honored and very active filmmaker. So I will be telling you a little bit about their work before they do their presentations. But before that, I want to introduce our Dean of Arts and Humanities here at Western, Dr. Michael Milday, who's going to say a few words.
Thank you, Patrick. And it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this speakers series and this event in the speaker series on creativity, innovation, and justice. Lovely to welcome Gui and Xiong as well. Thank you for joining us from the distant part of the left shore of this continent. As we think about creativity, innovation, and justice, I think it's important that we take the moment to acknowledge that our university here in London is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and Attawandaron peoples, and on lands that are connected with the London Township and Sombra treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. I want to say that, that these treaties are part of our history, but they also shape our present experience. And it is by understanding our often complicated and uncomfortable history that we can hope to develop a better future. And as we think about these sort of elements that shape us, the role of art, the role of creativity in coming to grips with the important issues of our day is incontrovertible. And it's going to be a great pleasure to share this possibility of exploration with our guests today. So Patrick, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Michael. That's so appreciated. So I just want to say our program this afternoon will involve a talk for about 25 minutes by Xiong, and then a talk for about the same amount of time by Gui, and then they will have a conversation. I'll ask them a few questions, and they certainly have lots to talk about as father and daughter and as artists. And then a couple of our students from the School for Advanced Studies in Arts and Humanities, Alexandra Rosenberg and Denise Zhu, also have some questions. And if you out there in Screenland have questions, please feel free to send them in on the chat, and we'll make sure that we take time for that. So I wanted to say a little bit about Gu. Gu is, I'm honored to say he's a friend of mine, somebody that I have worked with off and on over the years. And certainly his career is like few others, well, in Canada and like no other in truth. Gu is originally from Chongqing in China. He has exhibited nationally and internationally in over 70 solo exhibitions, has 3 public art commissions, and has been in 130 prominent national and international group exhibitions, including most recently, or very recently, Every.Now.Then, Reframing Nationhood at the Art Gallery of Ontario. He was involved in the parallel exhibition Voice of the Unseen, Chinese Independent Art at the Venice Biennale in 2013, and in the exhibition Border Zones at the Museum of Anthropology that was subtitled New Art Across Cultures, and that accompanied the Olympics in 2010. One of the groundbreaking exhibitions that Gu was involved in that you might hear a little bit about was the China Avant-Garde exhibition in 1989. And that was at the China National Museum of Fine Arts at a very important time in the modern history of China. Gu's work is represented in the collections of the National Gallery of Canada, the China National Museum of Fine Arts, and the Vancouver Art Gallery. And in as much as he has a huge long CV, the last thing I'll add is that there's a documentary, The Yellow Pear, The Story of Xiong, from a series entitled A Scattering of Seeds, The Creation of Canada, that was made by the History Channel in 2001. And also CBC TV made a documentary entitled My Country, Xiong in 2018. So I'm thrilled to welcome Gu. And now I will turn to Gui and say a few words about her amazing background and career. So Gui received her MFA in film production from the University of Southern California and has a BA from the University of British Columbia, where Gu is a professor, as a matter of fact. She's a lecturer at Chapman University's Dodge College of Film and Media Arts, and also at the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. Gui is also a proud member of the Brown Girls Doc Mafia and of Film Fatale, as well as the Asian American Documentary Network. I'm not actually going to say much about her work because that's going to be her job today, but I also wanted to note that Gui's work has been supported by the Sundance Institute, the Tribeca Film Festival, the Points North Institute, and the Hedgebrook and California Humanities. And she's also a directing fellow, or has been, I'm not quite sure of the history, with the Firelight Media and Film Independent, and she was awarded the Best Emerging Filmmaker at the 2019 Los Angeles Asian Pacific Film Festival. So I can tell you, you are in for a treat this afternoon. I'm now going to turn it over to Gu Xiong, and I will share my screen as I do that. So Gu, you need to unmute yourself. And I will share my screen.
Thank you, Patrick. That's a wonderful introduction for both of us. But I'm an artist, so I will start to talk about my works through my migration journeys from China to here. What I'm going to talk will be three parts today. One part will be my family's migration from China to Canada to build up our new identity here, and also to see the two generations, how to link to each other through the time. The second part will be my research on Chinese community history to dealing with history of land memory keeping in that situation. So the number three part will be, I will be focused on international migrant workers through the labor issues and globalizations, what's going on, especially in Ontario, because our research part were in Niagara-on-Lake, that region. Okay, so can you start to, I am from Chongqing, which is the largest city by the Yangtze River. This is a map of the Yangtze River from the mountains into the Pacific Ocean at the Shanghai area. And to cross the Pacific, to start our new life here in Canada, in Vancouver, by the Fraser River. So that is the two parts of our life to meet together through those two large rivers in my life. You know, in the virtual space, I merging those two rivers link together as one through the Pacific Ocean there. Okay. So what I have started here, I landed in Canada in 1989. I was in Banff Center for the Arts for a year as a residence artist there. So after I moved to Vancouver, start to have my real Canadian life, which is not easy to start to work at the UBC cafeteria as a busboy to cleaning a table, pick up the garbage. That's how I start my life here. The environment of cafeteria with the mass of garbages. So, but that was a very great beginning. The cafeteria opened a door for me to fit into this society. So through cleaning up the tables and pick up garbages, I actually cleaned up my inner self, then try to rebuild up my identity here in Canada and stand up from the bottom of a society to be an artist, a professional, teacher in Canada. Okay. So this was whatever I'm doing every day, throw away tons of garbage bags. But that is something interesting to see. When I saw students crushed Coca-Cola cans after a drink, I suddenly had my inspiration. I suddenly understood I was under a crossing between two cultures. So because you never find two crushed cans has the same shape, because everyone are unique. So that unique shape of crushed cans inspired me to build up my new identity in this new culture. Like the Andy Warhol's soup can. He talked about there is no knife under mass production, but for my crushed cans, I turned to an other side, from no life become life. Yeah, so also with the mass of those crushed cans, because Coca-Cola is such icon in the 80s and the 90s in China, but also an icon for me to start the new Canadian life here. Yeah, so later on in 2017, I also made this huge Coca-Cola, red Coca-Cola cans installation in my hometown, Chongqing, to show that migration journey, what it looks like. But this shape of the installation with 3,000 red crushed Coca-Cola cans, but also looks like an eagle or a big bird to take off. Okay. So this was another installation at the Vancouver Art Gallery in 1995 called Here, There, Everywhere. It is the mixed and multimedia installation within a large room involved with over 45 individual works. So here, as you see, the front wall has 8 and 5 feet portraits of me and my daughter. Between is the mouse words, quotation to talk about in a difficult time. You have to work hard to go through. That was whatever I have learned during the Cultural Revolution. But in the culture shock since we moved to Canada, we also have to work very hard to change our situations, to fit into the new culture and the communities. So in the foreground will be the campfire, but I did use the bulk of change, that logo symbol for 4 seasons. In the middle will be a TV monitor face up with a campfire, then the English awards appearing from the fire. That was to talk about our changes and our identities, how start to build up. And the family couch is to on the family couch there are several working uniforms, because at the right beginning we have to work. We had no time to enjoy our life or to have any entertainment at the time. Okay. So this is a portrait of Yu when she came to Canada. She was 7. Even though like her, she has to go through the culture shock to fit into the society. Okay, on the wall, I also have the image of British Columbia landscape and also with our everyday objects and the friend's portrait. For each image, I have a story in both English and Chinese to talk about the journey of our everyday life. Yeah, on the back wall will be, I made a large drawing, like 15 feet wide, 8 feet high, an image of Yu stand on the Rocky Mountains where I first landed in Canada. Because for her generation, this is a country where we belong. She speaks English, French, and Chinese. She is totally, international, but also regional here. Yeah, but also through our everyday life, this rice cooker sample, as a sample of traditional Chinese culture. But another one will be milk is a symbol of Western traditional culture for us. So by eating rice and drink milk every day, we try to bring two cultures together. And also this one called Smile. This was actually, I was hyped at the in Victoria open space gallery. Patrick was a curator for this exhibition. So I have created 3 of our family portrait for this installation, and also to have a poem to go with. Yeah, the poem will be on top. Maybe we can go to the poem. Yeah, the next one. So at the right beginning, when we don't speak a language, we try to use our smile to make communications with others. But it always made mistake because people didn't know why we smile. So until we learned the language, we understood what people said to us, a real smile appearing on our face. So this piece is talk about that situation. So this one was in 1997. I made this show at the airspace in Toronto. So I especially choose some artworks linked to Ontario region. So this one called the Redlands. So after years, we lived in Canada. We start to build up our new identities, but to looking back what we have been through, which is very awkward situations like this on the left side wall with our 3 of us family with clown on our face, because that symbol of clown, which is for as a parents to hide ourselves, that kind of pain, we lose our standard conditions in the new environment. But as my daughter, she came here, she had education here, she became a smart person in our family. So that was the situation. Can you go to the next one? Yeah, so from here, I also showed this slide to show at the right beginning how we grew involved with my artistic practice. For this one, because I have to make a big wall size, like a big drawing, large drawing, I didn't have enough time. So I had to let Gu Yu to participate with me to draw the black line on the paper. Okay. So then you see, so this is part of the exhibition. I have one wall, large wall of 5 Gu Yu's portrait I have made on canvas, but the background will be Madonna toys. So she is a person, is a generation. She grew up with those fantasy dreams, but she's a person, through that digital case there is she talked about she doesn't want to be a copy or a reproduction, but the original. Okay. So in 1997, we also made a multimedia performance at the Western Front in Vancouver. This exhibition, which deals with our three generations experiences, goes through the culture shock in Canada, but also in China. So I especially also asked Yu to participate, with me to create this piece. And she did write that story for this performance, and she did performing from beginning to end. So maybe the next one.
Okay, I can share the video now.
Sometimes, when I fall asleep, I think I am spinning a cocoon. Sometimes, I dream about flying my butterfly kite. Sometimes, I see other butterfly kites in the air. Dozens of them, hundreds of them, thousands of butterflies emerging from their cocoons, taking wing in a new city, a new country, a new world, together.
Yeah, so this performance also with live music, and also Gui did play saxophone at the end of the performance. I should say the project has the narrative from China to Canada, from the Panda Bear's hometown to Vancouver. Okay, so next one. Yeah, and meanwhile, I have to quickly show this river, a salmon fish river. I created 150 salmon fishes, and under to hang in the gallery ceiling, and the wall painted to red, because when salmon die, their body become red. And also on the floor will be the 150 pair of white socks to follow the salmon's path as our journey. So I just try to encourage myself and my family, like the salmon fish, to stand up, to go to a next level of the culture of the identity. Yeah, especially this one to talk about to swimming into the river, take a long distance swimming in order to understand another culture, experience another culture, than to reach the other shore. Okay. And this one will be at Toronto, subway station in 2006 through the how to say the photo festival there. I made the installation of 10 Canadian Chinese poetry to displayed in the St. Patrick subway station there. Yeah, each image will has the face to in 3 languages to talk about situations. Because for me, the subway is a good place because people come and go to carry on that journey of migrations. Okay. But from here, I have to go into second parts of my talk will be talk about the Chinese community history. You know, last November to this year, February, I made a show called The Remains of a Journey at the Center A and the Canton Sardine in Vancouver. So which is to talk about the 6 sides of the history of Chinese immigration to BC. So each side tells their own stories about how Chinese immigrants to Canada to build up their new life in this new homeland. But this is about the history of the land, the history of how we could keep the memory and how to make it continue. Yeah. So, but this is a large exhibition, over 100 photographs and also 7 video projections. So we did a great big research project from the BC Royal Art Museum, Vancouver City Archives, and the New Westminster City Archives, and also Cumberland Museum and Archives, and also BC UBC Chen Center to pile up those research together. Then also go to the side to shoot the film, but also to take a photograph, especially to use a drone to make a video. Okay, yeah, this is the photo showed us, you know, Yu and Tom Campbell, who's both of them are cinema photography, and also Tom editing the videos for this exhibition. We were with 2 workers from the Gulf Island National Park Reserve to accompany us to Desert Island for our research. This is a photograph. But from here, I have to quickly to talk about, this is Cumberland in 1888 to 1968. There were over 3,000 Chinese workers, mining workers, live and work there. They built up their communities there. But after a big fire, you know, the town was destroyed. Finally, the people moved away. Can you go to second one? Yeah, now this is what it looks like, an empty place, you know, within jungles and the grub main street there. The whole city was vanished. So this is a hiding point in Victoria. This is the Chinese cemetery, but also in the history was the bone house. Was a bone house for Chinese traditions. After you died and buried for 7 years in Canada, then the people has to dig out your body, then ship to hiding point, the bone house, to wash the bone, to wipe with the white cottons, then put into the box to ship back to China, to their hometown to be buried, because that's a Chinese tradition about home. Even though you have to die, you have to return. Okay, but through the Sino-Japanese War, the shipment was finally stopped. Next one. Yeah, so there were around 900 bodies has to buried here at the hiding point, but their tombstone all face to the Pacific, where they came from. So even they die, they want to go home. This one is showing the Mountain View Cemetery in Vancouver on 41st and Fraser Street. They're buried of hundreds of Chinese early pioneers of immigrants here. Because for me, when they buried here, they made their statement to tell the society here they belong here. This is their home. Okay. So this was the New Westminster High School here in BC. There was a Chinese cemetery with Jewish, Japanese, First Nations, and East Indians cemetery together. But in 1935, around that time, the city decided to move the cemetery away to build up the Douglas Park, and also in 50s to build up the high school here. So if you don't know the history, you don't know this was the Chinese and other group of people's cemetery. The BC Provincial Cemetery Act didn't protect them. You know, that kind of arrested histories, it is painful to re-looking. Okay. So also I included one Chinese place called Canada Village in Canton, Kaiping area, because the Chinese immigrant came to Canada, but also returned to their hometown around the 1920s, 30s because the discrimination to force them to leave. So they built up their dream village with a Western style building, but a Chinese tradition inside, because that they want to make a self-directed village to have a better life there, but also banded in the history. But now is the UNESCO heritage place in China. So that's whatever I choose the Darcy Island, especially to talk about this situation, you know, linked to the COVID-19 right now. So Darcy Island was one of the sites for leper colony for Chinese leprosy patients, was started by provincial government from 1891 to 1924. There were 43 Chinese male patients sent to the island. That place, there was difficult for them to live there because there was no drink water. The BC government has to send the basic supplies to them every 3 months, you know. So that was the situation for them. We can keep going. Yeah. So this is a video projection of the Darcy Island, you know, and this is the sites of their place where they stayed, you know, 100 years ago. Okay, keep going. So they also made the well to collect the rainwater for them to drink and for other things to use. And also in the exhibition area, so I have the two sides. One side on the left side will be the history photo from people live on Darcy Island. At the front side, there will be the medical photograph from BC Health, you know, from BC Royal Museum archives. I have found out and put it there. On the floor will be a sand with a poem wrote on the sand, which I have created for this exhibition. Yeah, this is the photograph of those Chinese leper patients, you know, live on that place for over 37 years. And also the individual patients photograph. It was done in 1922 to 32. You know, especially like this one, there were 2 nurses to force the patient to have the gesture to be taken, you know, that is sometimes is hardly to look into those individual pictures. Yeah, we had 37 images, but I only choose the 6 for the exhibition. So doing our research on the island, I will always look at those rocks by the water to imagine those people at the time what they did to sit on the stone to look at the Vancouver Island, but to cannot be reached. So then I made a poem about that kind of situation, live on island, you know, to make a poem installation in the gallery. So can you go to the next one? This is whatever I did write to see, they could see the other shore, but they couldn't return home. You know, even though they die, they still wish to be returned, but maybe never be accepted in their life. Okay, the Victoria government also put a plaque on the Darcy Island to indicate the 14 people with their name, but also with other people who has no names on that island from 1891 to 1924. That become a side place, an isolation place, you know, up to now. Okay. Yeah, I have to quickly to go. This is the final part for me to talk about the international migrant workers in Canada. Especially, this is the famous Niagara Falls. But beyond, thousands of those migration workers from Jamaica, from Mexico, and other countries to work here every year since 1960s up to now. Okay, next one. Yeah, so we started research from BC because there also has lots of migration workers in BC through Fraser Valley, the farmers. So then we finally went to Ontario. You know, next one. The Niagara on the Lake area. This area mainly of those Jamaican migrant workers who work here every year. You know, some people worked for over 40 years in the farmland here. And also the women's work also came from Mexico and other countries working in the peach house. Yeah, you can see that kind of situation for them as a worker, they have to renew their visa every year in order to come back to work. Okay, can you keep going? So also at winter time, there was a work on the ice group and also in the greenhouse to make decoration stuffs for people to have a happy, you know, Christmas. And also, can you go to the other one? Yeah, this one also, this Mr. Hagen, also from Jamaica, he worked there 48 years in Ontario. The year of 2018, he finally retired, then returned to his home. This was his bed. You can say he collected lots of toys for his for his grandchildren there. Okay. So they also make quiz to buy the everyday supplies to send back to their home. When I look at this, we were totally shocked what they have done. Okay, so I made my installation in 2015 based on my research from their life, called A Migrant's Quit. You know, whatever inside is everyday objects, oil, even though like the paper, toilet paper, you know, everything there. Okay, this is for me, it is not just you know, materials. It is their passions, memories about their families, then that kind of isolation, separation, all in that quotes there. This is in Jamaica. we went there to shoot a film about from their home on the mountains. Okay, then Mr. Higgins with his wife there. Okay, so this one was as Yutong. His name is Yutong. He lives in Blue Mountains. You know, beside is the mountain where he planted the coffee trees and the banana for survive for his family. For him, he come to Canada to work because he want to build up his own house. Okay. So from my research in Ontario, I finally made this installation at the AGO called the Illuminated Niagara Falls. I have used around 4,000 4x6 photographs to make a waterfall in the gallery space. You know, it's very high, like over 20 feet high. But at the bottom, you can keep going. Yeah, keep going. Then will be the fruit box. You know, when you buy fruit in Ontario, they give you a fruit box with a fruit inside. But for me, in the exhibition, I put those migrant workers photograph in there. But also those 5 colors, like for water, it is sold from their surrounding shops to show the Niagara Falls colorful water from light projection color on the Niagara Falls. For me, because those workers are the real people who made their contribution for that region, but they could be ignored by their productions just made in Canada, made in Ontario or BC. Their existence totally erased. So for me, I try to bring them into the light to let us to accept them. Okay. Yeah, so here will be, on the right side will be these 3 channel video interior migrations, and on the left side is my work in the gallery. Okay, you can keep going. Then we both had our catalogs there. Okay, so maybe we can start to talk. This is her installation in the exhibition. And one more, maybe. Yeah, so a lot of people.
That's the opening, I think.
Yeah, opening.
Yeah, so I'm gonna share part of the video installation that was turned into a documentary right now.
Yes. In a bathroom. Bathroom. I see. Yeah, master bedroom.
Master room?
Yeah, master bedroom. This is my room. This is the boss.
Yeah.
One over there, so.
I put one
One over there, so.
One
That's one there.
Oh, so the flick on, they switch it to other light up.
Yeah. Alright, you see that someone put the breaker. And the wire, the wire will come out so and come down this box.
Now look like.
And come in at this.
So I'm not fooling them at that. Are we not fooling them?
Well, enough we've been there, you know, so. Sometimes I get dreams, yes. Sometimes your dreams are in a different place. Yeah, them say one travel and one stay. Then they say they want to travel. If you don't come back, you don't wake.
Me, 5 daughters and 4 sons, that's 9, eh? Alright, bro, man, we can't call your name. Dream of me when you are lonely. Dream of me when you are sad and blue. As my darling, I will be home to send you this word from my heart. You are miles from me, my darling. I will be home in your arm where I belong. You are the nicest, nicest love I ever had. Okay, close your eye. Give me your hand, darling. Do you feel my heart beating? Do you understand? Do you feel the same? No, I only dreaming. An eternal face to face. We was meant to be, darling. And I watch you when you're sleeping. Do you understand? Do you feel the same? No, I only dreaming. Okay.
Yeah, so that was a really awesome experience working with my dad on that project. I think for me, what I was really struck by when I first started working on it was when my dad talked about, you know, his experience as a farmer during the Cultural Revolution, when he was, you know, only basically a teenager, and he was forced by the government to go to the rural countryside whereas he lived in the city to do farm work, and you know couldn't really have contact with family. And then also our own experience of immigration, and that idea of distance, because you know these workers, they only come to Canada for about 8 months out of the year, and then they have to go back every year to their home countries, and there's no pathway to citizenship. So it's like a perpetual kind of limbo space where they're always occupying, you know, their work is very much tied to the land, but they're not exactly accepted on this land, and they're kind of in this space floating between these two worlds. And I was interested in looking at and sort of capturing their interior life in terms of their memories of childhood, their dreams, versus their physical reality, which is, you know, 10-12 hour working days, really hot weather during picking season in the summer, just the physical work of engaging with the orchards and the fruits, and living in this very much isolated space with only other men, basically, and pretty much cut off from the rest of the town, Niagara on the Lake, you know, where they live there. And you know, although there's community members that really tried to bring them in, there was this immense sense of xenophobia that we felt even as my dad and I went there to, you know, try to talk to the farmers or try to talk to the local church. It was just a really formative experience. And I think for me, this was a chance to expand a little bit on the documentary form itself, because for this little short documentary, I didn't want to focus so much on narrative, a linear narrative. It was more about this kind of multi-sensorial experience of feeling those two worlds, feeling the world of the work in Canada and then also home, and what does that mean really when you spent a longer time in Canada working than you actually have with your family. And I think my dad's work in the AGO, that huge wall, it was very much playing with the space of the gallery and taking up a ton of space in this sort of epic way, and really bring that forth in terms of gallery goers or audiences. And for me, I feel like I was playing with that in that filmic space, with the multiple screens. In the gallery was 3 screens, and then in this case it was brought into these 2 screens. Yeah, and I think it's just, again, I think it's a different way to portray, you know, migrant workers, like minority population, that hadn't really been done before. I think often when filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, make work about these sort of invisible populations or marginalized populations, there's, you know, there's a tendency to need to really kind of make their experience, to showcase their experience, to tell their story in a very satisfying narrative, sort of like beginning, middle, end. You know, this is who they are, so that to basically instill a sense of empathy for this marginalized group. But however, I think it just kind of presupposes a power imbalance already in that experience. And I think in some ways, it's more human, more complicated to show their life and show, their being interior and exterior in this way that is not just about boiling everything down into a narrative. And that's kind of where I guess we get to talking about storytelling, because I think as you see in my dad's work, a lot of it is about storytelling. It's especially in the early days, it was very much about the story of our family, whether it's me, my mom, or my dad. And that was something that I grew up with, I think from my earliest memories. Even in China, where my dad taught at an art school in China, and everyone lived in the art school. So you're just surrounded by people making art, students, people who are coming in to pose as models, like life drawing models. There was just art everywhere, and that was something that I felt was so natural. And when we came to Canada, my dad turned the garage, we lived in a basement, but we had a garage in the property, and he turned that into his studio. And to me, that was my early definition of what an artist was. Like, that you have your own space, you get to have your own studio, and you get to kind of fill it with whatever you want. Like, it's kind of like a reflection of your brain or something externalized in the space around you. And I just thought that was super cool. Like, I thought that was, I think I wanted that for myself. Like, I want a studio when I was a kid. And I think when my dad described, artistic practice, that's something that just even in my film education doesn't really get talked about as much. It's about a craft, it's, whatever. But for me, I think it's interesting to call it artistic practice, because it's a continual space of learning. It's a continual reimagining, a continual growth of taking things you learn and sort of like processing and creating something out of that. So I really approach my work, I think, as a filmmaker in that sense as well. And that is also, that is against this overwhelming pressure to sort of commercialize film, because film is a very sort of a commercial industry. It's about a product, it's about distribution, it's about, it's an industry where like distributors, control all of the money, all of the means of production and distribution, and sort of the workers in essence of our industry, where it's filmmakers, writers, actors, whoever, we don't have that power, So I think for me, just thinking about it as an artistic practice is something that is inspiring to me. And in terms of our, family history, I think from day one, when my dad was making those shows about our journey, to me, it was not really about a story of assimilation necessarily. I think it was really about belonging. And what does it really mean to belong? It really also means for us as the immigrants to create the space for ourselves. And my dad was doing it through art. He literally, was having art shows in galleries where you have the space to fill with our story. And it's a negotiation with the sort of dominant culture, whether it's language or social, political systems. And it's a process that changes both of us. It's something that changes us as the immigrants, but also our stories, because we're sharing them and we're able to share them, it changes the culture around us, the society around us. So I think that's really important. And I think that's something that I can also continue to think about, in my work. And, my first, you saw the Girl from China clip, the performance I did, which was, the storytelling performance. And, looking back on it now, like I almost have forgotten. It was interesting watching because I've almost forgotten so much of it, but it just seems like the way that I was telling the story, it was like so full of earnestness. And I mean that with like, a great affection for myself, that, it's like this earnest expression that I think people are not used to in Western culture. I think there is sometimes people look down on just earnest expression, but I think for me and for my dad, that earnestness is about survival too. It's about really taking a stand, for who you are in the most authentic and vulnerable way. That's not trying to look at it from a place of irony or humor or anything. It's just like very straightforward. So I think I'm gonna now jump to my film school thesis film, which is called A Moth in Spring. And it really kind of, if you think about like my dad's work in terms of talking about our family, it is an exploration. It's a personal documentary. It's an exploration of our family history that I have been fascinated by since I was a little girl and growing up in Canada away from my family in China. And this is a hybrid documentary that started off as sort of a fictionalized account of my childhood, and it became a documentary because I spent months in China just being with my family, filming with them, and kind of making like playful things doing these playful things together. So Patrick is going to play a clip from it with that involves my grandparents.
Caught between vague memories of my past life and the present city, I searched for another way forward. For the first time, I saw the distance between my family and me after 20 years apart.
懂吗？啊？你懂吗？还是你长袖？再喊一遍，再喊一遍。月儿。你喊我名字。月儿。你这个小。慢一点。啊？慢一点。你晓不晓得吃苦是啥子？月儿，月儿，你晓不晓得一个是啥子？你晓不晓得右派是啥子？嗯？你晓不晓得黑五类是啥子？你晓不晓得你为啥子姓顾不姓杨？你晓不晓得一家人长期分离是啥子味道？月儿，你晓不晓得？
Yeah, so again, this short documentary was included both sort of fictionalized scripted scenes, which I hired actors, and then this footage with my family in essence. And I really loved this scene with my grandparents because again, the whole thing is basically a bunch of questions that, and I think that just literally portrays, my lack of knowledge in this kind of honest, but yet sort of generative, creative way. I was obviously not alive when they went through all of these things and the questions in the film. I came up with them, and these are concepts I don't know anything about. And so I think having them ask me those questions and not having an answer, I think that was just very true to my relationship to them. As someone who, for me, I feel like my whole life I've you know I have a strong relationship with place. Everywhere I go, I build that strong relationship, whether it's in Canada and Vancouver or in Los Angeles in the US. But there's always a sense of not being grounded and always sort of a temporary feeling. There's always this emotional push and pull of a love for a place, but always feeling like I am, traveling through that. And I think in terms of, the images that you see, some of them were almost like POV images of how I would feel going through that space, which was, my grandparents' home, and I grew up there. It's something that I have like very early memories of, but when I'm going back, it still feels like I'm detached in a way. And I think from there, that was my first short documentary. That was a personal film, but moving from there, my other films have been about other people, like other people's stories. And I feel like the way that, I like to approach it is I never think that, oh, I am the same. We are the same as you. Therefore, you should trust me. Therefore, I'm able to tell your story. I always come from a place of like analogous experience and emotion. Like there's something in my life that I feel like is similar to what you have experienced, or I have similar questions as you do, and so let's go on this journey together. And so the film that I create is actually more of like a translation rather than me telling their story. It's a translation of what they tell me through my experience and through my worldview. And I think there's, in terms of traditional documentary storytelling, there's a huge power imbalance between the filmmaker, who is, the one with the camera, who is there, in the traditional sort of observational sense, who is supposed to be this fly on the wall and in a way not really intervene with what you're sort of capturing in front of you. But I feel like that is just intrinsically false. And I think in my work, I really like to sort of play with that and really make aware of that kind of dynamic, because I think for me, making a documentary is me putting a question out into the world and waiting for them to give me an answer, or trying to find an answer to that question. And sometimes that question changes and evolves. It's this sort of dual relationship, a collaboration, just like in fictional film, you have the director and then you have actors that are going to bring their world to your film. So I think recently a friend of mine who's also a filmmaker was talking to me about, 3 ways in which film work can be political, which meaning relating to social structures, not necessarily political like parties or whatever. But one is, it can be political in terms of content, in terms of the stories you choose to tell, in terms of form, like the way you choose to tell the story, and then also in terms of the method of how you're making that work. And I think for me, I'm really interested in exploring all 3 of those things in my work in different ways. So my later work, which, I recently finished 2 feature-length documentaries. One is called Who is Arthur Chu, which follows this Asian American Jeopardy champion who went viral, and he was trying to leverage that platform into, a writing career, talking about cultural issues like racism, misogyny, while at the same time trying to deal with a lot of the baggage and traumas that he's experienced as an immigrant, Asian American immigrant in America. So I think having lived in the US now for like basically 10 years, I think I have this very different view on how, you know, the role of Asian Americans here in this country, which is basically like, you know, what my dad was saying, like you're totally erased, like you're living in this crushing weight of invisibility. And although, you know, in relation to, you know, African American communities or other ethnic minorities, that's not really necessarily endangering your life as much as some of the other situations, but it's a different kind of, you know, violence that does get enacted. And I think for Who is Arthur Chu, it was a character study on this guy Arthur, who has so much anger because of that kind of violence, and it was a learning process to portray this complicated character in a way that doesn't fit with this model minority myth, but also isn't a puff piece that is not just painting him as a brilliant hero. So I think, Patrick, you can play the trailer now.
A Jeopardy means one of those moments when you've bet all your money, everything's on the line.
Arthur. What is Philbin? Regis Philbin, yes. Arthur. What is Louisiana? That's the state. Arthur. What is Dell? Dell is the company. Arthur. What are pixels? Right. And you have Big League.
This 30-year-old from Ohio is single-handedly turning America's favorite quiz show into a mind game.
It took a little while for Arthur to get the audiences to warm up to him.
This Asian on Jeopardy is one of the worst human beings on the planet. The Asian guy on Jeopardy is such a cocky bastard. I hope your wife dies.
My dad always taught me, with good reason, that there's value in a simple life, a life without jeopardy, as little as possible. A steady job, you know, keeping your head down, avoiding controversy, avoiding conflict. I had all that. And now I started saying yes to those jeopardies instead of saying no. You know, I have the right to be heard. I have the right to be different. I have the right to break rules. To me, that's something Asian Americans haven't done enough of, that we don't have enough political activism, we don't have enough people speaking out and being different, we don't have enough people making it hard. You feel like this is too easy. Because I get it, it is, in the end, it's who I am.
So that was a trailer for this feature film. And for me, I was really interested in Arthur as, again, someone just breaking conventions. And for me in this film, I wanted to break with the narrative convention of having, you know, the hero. What is the hero's journey? To me, Arthur, I see him more as an anti-hero. And I think that's something that's like a space that I feel like, you know, minorities, ethnic minorities, men, Asians have not really been able to really hold that kind of space. Like either you're expected to be perfect or you're painted as this, you know, totally stereotypical villain kind of character. So I think for me, I just learned a lot in terms of how to, you know, be true to the people that I'm making the film about. And in my other film is called A Woman's Work. I actually started that film at the same time as working on Who is Arthur Chu. And A Woman's Work actually follows two former NFL cheerleaders who sued the NFL and their teams for wage theft. They were actually paid less than minimum wage for their work as sort of these icons that are part of the America's favorite pastime, this multi-billion-dollar industry. So I think if you look at those two films, they feel very different on the surface, but to me, they're very much connected because both are sort of in their own strange ways, like very much marginalized people or stereotyped people. There's so many stereotypes when it comes to Asian males, and there's so many stereotypes when it comes to cheerleaders, you know, and it's part of that same world of toxic masculinity, of hyper masculinity that, you know, feminizes and is racist against Asian males. And then also, you know, in terms of rape culture, tells these women that, oh, well, you know, we deserve to consume your bodies, your sexuality for free. You don't deserve to be paid. You know, this is something that is natural in this natural sort of hierarchy of things where you're on the bottom. So I think I was really interested in these like unlikely characters who are then trying to take their power back and really learn about themselves, you know, at the same time. I think for a woman's work, it follows these women for over 4 years as they're battling this lawsuit, but it's also about them learning about what it actually means to be a feminist. You know, what does that really mean? And really through their lived experience, contending with these ideas and these structures that they never had to do before. So I think, Patrick, can you show the clip from a woman's work?
You know, when people ask me if I'm a Jill, I take it as a compliment, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know, I'm really not. It's just, I don't know. I don't know how to take it because that's also the ones that got the lawsuit going, so.
No, nobody cares about the Jills. No, honestly, no, I'm not, like, all they do is, like, tramp themselves out for guys, drunk guys.
Which is you every time you go to a building.
No, it's not, dude.
I guess in the grand scheme of things, you're gonna get paid what you're worth.
They make
pay $10
millions.
an hour for you to shovel out the stadium.
Yeah.
They could at least get that.
Yeah.
I mean,
you know, younger girls are growing up trying to accept themselves for who they are, and they can't because they see all these women that are tiny little stick figures. And I don't agree with the image that a lot of these NFL cheerleaders are portraying.
hi, Maria. Can you say hi to mommy? Good girl.
When I first saw the Jills, I don't know what they were doing. I don't know what they were trying to sell or anything, but there were two girls there. And I remember going up to them and getting my picture taken.
Ooh.
They were so beautiful and they were all sparkly in their uniforms. They just give off this good feeling vibe and you want that.
Maria, what do you got in your bathing suit? Water polo? Oh my god. Oh! Get it, Maria!
There's a very specific look to being a Buffalo Jill that they liked. You can only wear red lipstick. You have to have fake eyelashes. It's a very bold look. I thought I looked really pretty, but it was a different look, a look that I wasn't used to, and I liked it. Why would a grown woman want to be a cheerleader anyway? Show off your body, cater to men at other events. I don't feel sorry for them at all. I have no respect for these women. Wow. Okay, if a woman signed an agreement to let Playboy take nude pics of her, should she be able to later sue them for taking nude pics of her? She was probably getting paid. They have to be realist. They aren't needed, necessary, and neither is their talent anything of value. Oh my God, it like makes me nauseous. I would never say that about somebody's job. I would never say that about anything that anyone has accomplished that felt like it was worth something to them.
Yeah, so I think for me in this scene as well, like just starting from, you know, the on-the-fly interviews with the football fans and then going to Maria's sort of memories and inner life. It again, I think I was interested in that interplay between what external perception, you know, and what you understand as your internal truth and the clash between the two and sort of the power play between the two. I think one of the football teams in response to one of these lawsuits was like, you know, well, perception is reality in the workplace. right? So really what meaning like the external interpretation of who you are, that is the reality. It doesn't matter what you feel or think on the inside. But I think I was really interested in bringing out through that archival footage and intercut with that the footage of the cheerleaders that was really created by the NFL, by these teams to sell these women, to sell their bodies. That interplay and negotiation between the two, and to really assert her voice throughout all of that was something that I was really interested in, and I thought was very, again, fruitful. So I think that's pretty much it for me, and I think we can move on to questions and whatnot. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Xiong and Gui. We only have about we can probably take about 15 minutes. So I'm thinking maybe Alex and Denise, if you want to put on your cameras too, you can kind of join us on screen if you would like to. First of all, welcome. I have Xiong and Gui and I had some conversations about some things we could talk about. And I'm going to sort of simplify some of what we had talked about into maybe sort of one large question, and that's about storytelling. And storytelling and maybe family and being an artist. So those three things. So Gu, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your relationship to the need to tell stories. And, was that part of your family background? And, where did that come from? And then maybe, Gui, you could talk a little bit about your connection to, to the storytelling of your father, an artist, and also maybe, I know you've talked a bit about the burden of storytelling, so maybe you could also say something about that. So Gu, do you want to start, Xiong?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I think the storytelling is important for my family. Why is that? Like I talked about, I grew up during the Cultural Revolution. The individual couldn't talk about your own situations to the public. You couldn't say that. If you do, you probably could into the trouble. So like my family story from my parents, also they're hardly to tell me what was going on. I have to figure out myself. I feel the pressure, the discrimination from the society, but I couldn't know why, because my father didn't live with us, because he wasn't away, to a labor camp after he stood up to talk about his idea. So, but to move to Canada as an immigrant, I also found that it's very important to tell the story to people and to my daughter Gui, to carry on that history from China to the present time. As an immigrant, the first generation, they always gave up themselves to try to make a better situations for their kids, to have a better education, to have a better job. But for me, the first generation is the most valuable generation because they have another culture to move to this new place. That their practice to bring two cultures together, that kind of thoughts, practice, actions has to be heard, has to be seen. That will be encourages their next generation to continue. So that's why I remember when Gui were young, I always took her to art exhibitions, talks. I also asked her to write her own stories, to write her memories. In what sometimes also to ask her to translate the Chinese philosophy stories, to understand what the cultural spirit is from the Chinese culture. So for myself, my work is to tell our migration experiences, thoughts I like to share with people. I felt that I was lucky because I'm an artist. I could use art format to make exhibitions, to share my thoughts with people in the public.
Thanks so much. So Gui, do you want to pick up from there? And maybe you could also say something about, did you think that your father had the idea that you should be an artist, or what was the expectation around storytelling?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think growing up in Canada, there's a huge Chinese population, Asian population there, and most of my friends were Chinese or Asian, and their families, none of their families would talk to them about what their family stories were really. But I felt like my family and my dad was sort of a weird person, I guess, for just standing out in that way, because that's kind of what he would constantly talk about and teach me. And I think that was both like a gift. I was telling Patrick, both a gift and also a burden in a way, because unlike maybe some of my other peers, they were really pressured to become like doctors or lawyers or do a very do that stable profession, kind of like Arthur Chu in the movie. He says a life without jeopardy, right? A stable life, and that was that pressure. And for me, I feel like it was the opposite. I think with the stories, because these were stories that were dangerous stories, if that makes sense. Like these were stories and memories that people were afraid of, right? And they were that was passed on to me to try to understand. And I felt like severely handicapped because although I speak Chinese, I can read Chinese mostly, but I didn't grow up in that cultural context. I didn't also experience any of those things. My world in Canada and also living in the US is so vastly different that it would be impossible for me to actually have like a full understanding of what those experiences were like. And that's why I feel like for my storytelling, it's about recognizing that kind of gap, that kind of inability almost to really comprehend, but through that process is to gain some kind of relationship, to create some kind of relationship there. And I think obviously I feel like my dad, there's this Chinese story about a guy who's trying to move a mountain in front of his house and everyone thinks like he's really dumb, like why are you trying to move this mountain, you're never gonna do it. And he had like 3 sons. So he made his 3 sons, like every day they would like chip away at this mountain, and he made his 3 sons do it too. And then eventually, after like, I don't know, decades, this mountain was moved in front of his house. So I think similarly, I think with some of the goals, with my grandparents, my parents, I feel like they're passed down onto me, and now it's my turn, and it's about something bigger than us, right? It's about changing something that is bigger than us. So that's really difficult. I think it's more difficult than becoming a lawyer, probably.
Of course.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Kui. Actually, I think Denise has a question, and it probably relates a little bit to what we're talking about. Do you want to go ahead, Denise?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I just wanted to thank you both for sharing your art and experiences. My mom was actually watching the talk alongside me, so we really enjoyed that. That was a great bonding experience. And I guess now my question is sort of a series of nested questions, but I was wondering if either of you had, or both of you, had advice for people who want to use storytelling to advocate for social change, and how do you suggest getting started, and how is it best for artists to leverage like the personal in their work to advocate for others? Thank you.
Do you want to speak out?
You can go first.
Yeah, I think that's very important that everybody should do this storytelling, to their family, to their friends, then their school, their communities. Because for me, individual story is very important. You write your own story. You have your own voice. You cannot be controlled by any powers, whatever. This is the truth of the life of individual. This is the truth of the thought from that individual. It has to be heard.
Thank you. Gui, do you want to
Yeah, I think a lot of that's a big part of documentary filmmaking, because a lot of filmmakers who make like what we'll call social justice documentaries, who are trying to document, bear witness to some social or cultural struggles, and there's this whole kind of side industry or kind of job that has sprung up called impact producing, which is taking the film that was made and then plugging that into ongoing sort of cultural change, social change work, to use that film as a jumping off point, as a conversation starter, as sort of advocating for certain changes. And I think for a woman's work, that's something that I definitely worked through and thought through. And actually that film was just released basically in January and over this past month. And we've seen now that it really was able to bring together these very disparate communities of people, people who are like feminist lawyers who are working in labor law, lawmakers, female athletes who are also activists, and then college athletes, and then cheerleaders and dancers who were basically left out of the feminist narrative overall, for decades, because women judge them as being allowing men to objectify them and so forth. There's a lot of stereotypes around that. So I think I saw firsthand in terms of the way that my film could do that. But I think it's something, I think for me as a filmmaker, that's not something I necessarily would focus on, like the end result. I think the most important thing is to focus on like your processes. Like I mentioned, there's 3 ways to be political in your work. I think you really need to focus on the first 2, which is the content, the story, and then and also the way, the form, and the way that you're making your film. Like, is it in collaboration with the people that you are trying to sort of uplift or bring into power or so on? Like, what are those processes and what are your methodologies? I think that's the most important thing to focus on. And then once you have a film, once you've made those connections with the communities you're making the film on, the impact part is almost like a natural extension to your work. And there's going to be people who are going to find meaning and value in your stories, in your work that you're telling.
Thank you. It sounds actually like you in a way are coming back around to what your father Gu Zhang was saying. You need to tell stories that really connect and actually resonate with you, and they will connect with others. I think Alex, you have a question?
Yes, thank you both so much for speaking to us today. My parents both come from very different cultures, so I think my mom, much like Denise's, as an immigrant, would love both your work. So I'm very much looking forward to showing her after this. But my question is, during the pandemic, I've seen an increase in the number of documentaries and nonfiction media available on streaming services, a lot of them using COVID and American politics as their subject matter. In these times, I'm wondering, Gui, what you think it is about documentaries that people are craving, and what excites you most about post-pandemic documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, I think, thank you for your question. I think that a lot of the films that are coming out right now during the pandemic, they're very important, obviously, because it's like history in the making. Like you have to kind of document what is going on. But I think there's also a lot of sort of opportunism that is happening right now in terms of content. And because if you think about the documentary industry in the past 5-6 years, there's been a lot of huge industry players that have entered the documentary space, like the streamers, Netflix, Amazon, those types of people. And then their goal is to create products that they can sell, right? And then you have this other group of people, like I feel like independent documentary filmmakers, where their goals are to uplift people, uplift stories, or tell meaningful stories to them, right? So I think in this moment where you see this huge boon of documentary films and series and so on, there's both, right? There's both, like this kind of highly commercialized content that is for consumption, more purely consumption. And then you have the other filmmakers who are just really trying to reflect on history and reflect on this moment. So I think there's both of those happening. And for me, during the pandemic, actually, last year, I was actually able to go to Vancouver to live with my parents for a few months, and that's where I helped my dad with the Remains of the Journey show, where we went to Darcy Island and all these different places to film those historic sites. And I also did a lot of filming, just around the house in the domestic space of our house. It was the first time I spent so much time there, and I think a lot of things were just emerging for me in terms of reflecting on back again onto our family history and our family story. So I think for me going forward, moving out of this pandemic, that's something that I want to focus on, and hopefully, for example, that we can go back to China and see my family. Like right now we're not able to, but again, just reflecting on and documenting on that experience of distance and how we're negotiating that distance, even on WeChat, virtually, and trying to have that connection despite everything. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We need to wrap up soon, but I'm going to just follow up with Xiong. Do you have any thoughts about, maybe the pandemic or what's possible after the pandemic as an artist? I mean, things that artists maybe need to do now or after.
Well, I think everyone have their own situations and a challenge to confront. So that's individual's choices, but also at the same time, that's a responsibility when the society raises the questions as an artist, what your activity, what you could do, at the same time. But for me, the Remains of a Journey is part of the goal to link to the pandemic. For example, like Darcy Island, to see that kind of isolation 100 years ago. For those people, they had to be isolated there in a tiny island for over 35 years, their lifetime, even though until they die, there was no hope. Yeah, so that kind of situation, for me, I don't give a direct answer. I like people to think about. That was happened 100 years ago. That was a history. Why it was happened, and what could we do now? I think that's something as an artist that I like to do is raise the questions. I don't make slogan that the truth, the whole humanity is. We have to touch. That's very important area. We have to always remember as an artist.
Thank you. Well, it's kind of sad to end this amazing conversation and exchange, but that's actually a wonderful note to end on. So I want to just say what an honor it's been to have Xiong and Wei with us and to share such rich and challenging work, but also to share your connection and your lives as artists and storytellers. And so it's been a real gift for all of us. So I thank you on behalf of our audience here and our audience on screen, and also the talk will be on our website and we'll be really happy to share it. So thank you both very much. And thank you to Denise and Alex as well.
Thank you,
Thank
Patrick.
you.
And thank you, Denise and Alex. And thanks for all who participated with this talk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, all the best. Gonna sign up.
Bye.
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 Wow, thank you. Wonderful.
Yeah, I'll talk to you. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay.